Welcome to the Wednesday, January 21st, 2026 edition of the Daily Article Podcast from Denison Forum. I'm Chris Elkins, narrator. Dr. Ryan Denison, Senior Editor for Theology, authored today's Daily Article. When President Trump takes the stage in Davos, Switzerland later today for his speech at this year's World Economic Forum, it will mark the first time he's visited the conference in person in 6 years. He appeared via video conference at last year's event to call for a quick end to the war in Ukraine and to foreshadow the tariffs and other economic policies he would unleash in the months to come. Overall, the speech set the tone for his first year in office, even if it came in contrast to their theme, collaboration for the intelligent age. And most expect today's speech to follow along similar lines. The theme of this year's conference is a spirit of dialogue, and expectations are mixed on how much genuine dialogue will occur. A White House official said the president is expected to focus on affordability while calling on Europe to fall in line on both Greenland and the policies he will argue, quote, propel the United States to lead the world in economic growth. But while the world waits to see what he will say, it's the meetings behind the scenes that could end up being the most significant aspect of the event. President Trump is taking some of his cabinet's most important and busiest people with him. Secretary of State Marco Rubio, Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent, and Special Envoy Steve Witkoff are all expected to attend the conference alongside the president. Their presence has many speculating that Trump intends to accomplish far more than simply address the world during his time in Switzerland. Among those expected endeavors, the most important are thought to be a meeting with Ukrainian President Vladimir Zelensky, where some believe they will sign new security guarantees that could pave the road for a ceasefire with Russia. The first meeting of the newly formed Board of Peace, which has grown more controversial in recent days after a draft of its charter revealed its members intend to, quote, secure enduring peace in areas affected or threatened by conflict. That work would require a far greater scope and scale than simply facilitating the rebuilding of Gaza, and has many concerned that Trump is attempting to start a new NATO, but under his leadership. An advancement of conversations concerning Greenland, with the president speculating that, quote, things are going to work out pretty well, actually, so I think something's going to happen that's going to be very good for everybody, end quote. Most doubt such a quick resolution is possible, but as I discussed in yesterday's edition of The Focus, which is linked in today's podcast episode notes, the ice-covered island is shaping up to be an inflection point after which America's relationship with its European allies is likely to change in lasting and substantial ways, regardless of which path they take. And the international conflicts, like the evolving situation in Iran and China's continued efforts to convince the world that it should be allowed to take Taiwan. It's quite possible that the manner in which the Greenland situation plays itself out could have a direct effect on China's willingness to advance on the much-coveted island near its own borders. Against the backdrop of these political developments, the question of just what kind of world will be waiting for global leaders this time next year remains as difficult to answer as at any point in recent history. As a result, the conference itself has seen a similarly substantial shift in its focus. Across recent years, the World Economic Forum has seemed primarily concerned with, quote, high-minded panel discussions about climate change, caring for refugees, and the future of healthcare. It was essentially a venue for the world's elite to decide on the most direct path to living on the right side of history, at least as they saw it. This year, however, that's all changed quite a bit. While climate change, poverty, and other social ills still have their place in the proceedings, the largest crowds and most significant interest are centered on artificial intelligence and technological advancements. Attendees aren't really even trying to pretend that the social and cultural aspects matter to the same degree as before. In short, the world has more pressing issues than climate change, and the conference's content reflects that reality. Perhaps that shouldn't come as much of a surprise, though. After all, civilizations have prioritized their most immediate concerns for most of human history, and the people who didn't were rarely given the opportunity to repeat that decision. When used well, the necessary reordering of priorities can clarify what's truly important in ways that a general sense of peace and security cannot. In fact, many of the most important theological principles at the core of how we understand God and the nature of salvation were codified for that very same reason, and we would each do well to apply that lesson to our own lives today. Starting in the 4th century, the church embarked upon a series of councils to clarify some of the most divisive and challenging aspects of understanding our infinite God. However, the vast majority of these councils occurred in the eastern part of the Roman Empire, especially once you get to the 5th century. While the emperor's proximity in Constantinople explains part of that reasoning, the barbarian tribes that routinely invaded the western half of the empire played a much more significant role. As the church began to discover, it's far easier to find the time to debate theological minutiae when there's not a horde of traveling armies attempting to burn your villages and kill your people. Consequently, the East had the margin to debate these issues, while the West was forced to rely on the teachings that they'd always considered true and then try not to die before they could put them into practice. And heresy was often less a problem there as a result. In the same way, the clarity we receive while in the midst of difficult times is often part of God's redemption of those inevitable trials. Some lessons can only be taught when our focus is forced on Him out of a desperate recognition of our need for His power, presence, and peace in our lives. Our smaller problems don't go away, but they can be easier to put into their proper place. So, are there any issues in your life that have risen to a far greater place of importance than they actually warrant? Is God trying to get your attention and recalibrate your priorities? Now is the best time to ask Him. Lent is a meaningful opportunity to walk more closely with Jesus. That's why we created Walking in His Commands, a Lenten journey with Jesus. It's a new 46-day devotional designed to help you rediscover the joy of loving Jesus through obedience. So, when you make a donation, we'll send you a copy as our thank you for supporting Denison Forum. Prepare your heart for Easter with scripture, reflection, and a daily invitation to follow Christ in every area of life. Get your devotional today by visiting supportdf.org. Find a link to give in today's podcast episode notes.